Hey, Branford Marsalis, thanks for coming.
Hey, Paul Wells. 40 years, bro.
I know.
And 40 years. You were a music critic in Montreal.
Yeah.
I remember. We were young.
It was my first summer in Montreal. And you were doing interviews at the Musicians Hotel. And I had not signed up for an interview with Branford Marsalis, but I figured
whoever that was,
the publicity person didn't know, so I just lied.
Right.
I said, yeah, I'm on that list. She said, no, you're not. I said, well, I should be. So we got the interview, and then
there you go.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
Now, you're basically on a tour with your quartet right now. This is like, you're in Ottawa on a kind of like between quartet gigs, am I right?
We are perpetually on tour with the quartet. We don't, like we have a new record coming out. It's not going to be the Belonging tour or the Secret Between the Shadow and the, so how many cities are you going to put on your tour? So you can assume, yeah, we're on tour forever until we stop doing it.
Do you often take a parenthesis out of, like, so you were in Flushing, Queens on the weekend.
Yesterday. Sunday. Yeah, Sunday.
And now you're in Ottawa to play the Lieberson Neruda songs and the music that John Williams wrote for Catch Me If You Can.
Yeah.
Does that, going from the jazz thing to the classical thing, does that require any kind of gear shift for you?
No.
No?
It did at first.
Yeah.
It was traumatizing. I used to be like, I don't want any, I don't want to do anything else, a week before the gig. Because it's hard. It's hard to do. And it's hard to make that transition. I guess the metaphor I use is in music conventions or talks, I say, so y'all remember when you were 12 and you played in the band and you sucked, but everybody told you were great. Your band director told you were great. Your parents said it was great, so you believed it. And they're like, yeah, of course. I said, yeah, well, when you're 42, nobody says that. They just go, yeah, man, keep trying. It's just, I said, it was really, I don't regret it.
Yeah.
But it was, that first 10 years was that's a different mindset, man. It's tough.
Are you getting better at it?
I'm getting less shitty at it. That's the way I tend to look at it. Because I know how high the standard is. And I'm less crappy than I was. Better? It's subjective, I guess. I'm more comfortable on stage. I'm not most of the time I'm not kind of panicked when I'm up there, so it allows me to play music. Mm-hmm. When you're kind of panicked, then you're focused on the notes. Got to get the notes right. And when you're relaxed, you can say, well, I got the notes, so now let's just focus on what it sounds like. Let's try to blend in with the orchestra and make music.
Do the people who greet you and look after you in the jazz world treat you differently from symphony people? Like that. So on a practical level, is it a different kind of vibe around a concert hall compared to?
Nobody really looks after us.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, yeah, rhetorically, there's some people who need looking after because they kind of have that fragile sensibility, and as you well know, I don't really possess that. So, were the weather warmer, we would simply walk to the to the Art Center, to the NAC, because it's a very nice walk, but it's freezing outside, so we'll get a ride. But generally, they they tell us what time to be there, and we'll be there.
Okay.
We don't need to have extra time, and we don't need to make sure that everything is just right, and we don't have the proverbial green M&M situation. We just say, hey, man, what time do we show up? Great, let's do that. We need you to do this. Okay, sure, let's do that, whatever.
So here's the thing. I spent a little bit of time last night catching up to your recent recorded work, and I listened to the music that you wrote for the Netflix show about Bayard Rustin.
Yeah.
And this recording of some Mahler songs that you did with the Virginia Symphony.
Yeah.
And it could hardly be more different. But there's this tune, Bayard Bush Flashback from the Rustin soundtrack, which is like a ballad.
Oh, the bus flashback.
Yeah. And then I listened to one of the Rocket Leader tracks, and I thought, well, that's the same. That's Branford. even though one's on tenor and one's on alto, one is something that you wrote and one is something you sure didn't. Do you hear the same? Do you hear a voice in all of these different settings that you're stuck with, or that you're?
Well, we're all stuck with the voice we have. Yeah. That's why if you remember in your 40s in jazz, musicians and critics were always saying stupid things like, he or she has not yet found their voice, as though it's out there to be grabbed, it's hiding in a bush. We all have a voice.
Yeah.
And in all aspects, whether it's sports, whether it's acting, whether it's writing, we all have a voice. Now, the question becomes to me is that, are you self-aware enough to see where you're bad, and will you try to fix it? And if you choose to do that, then there's a growth that comes from that. And that's how you develop your voice. A lot of times in music, as Illinois Jaquette told me once, just find 2 or 3 things that's yours and stick with it. That way everybody knows it's you. I mean, yeah, okay, great. That also puts you in a box, and you're stuck in that box and in that place and in that space. Mm-hmm. So even when I was a younger person, I mean, the rhetoric hasn't changed for me since the 1980s. Growth comes from stealing from people who are better than you. And a lot of musicians say, well, I don't listen to anybody. And I say, yeah, it sounds like that. And I don't mean it as a compliment, but I let them try to figure out which way it is. I'm not a fan of like false originality. So yeah, I know it's me, mm-hmm. but I also have recordings of me when I was 16 playing a pentatonic scale on everything. And it still sounds like me, it's just really crappy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I could hear it and say, oh, that's me. But lately there are much better versions of me than in prior times.
See, I've got stuck in my head something that a very good writer wrote about your first album a million years ago. A.B. Spellman said nice things about the album. He said, his tone is off-the-rack modern. And even then I was in high school. I thought, man, that's got to hurt. The one thing we can say about your sound now is it is not off the rack.
Correct.
It is mysterious and strange and all the things that you kind of hope that music will sound like.
Well, I just stole from all the great people. When I was 24, I didn't have anything. So he was right. It was pretty much off the rack modern because that's all I had. And I mean, it's not like it's not like it's new in music. I mean, it's just like a historical thing. Like, I mean, we're having political elections we just had our big political election in the U.S. You're having elections here, and the success or failure is based on the collective amnesia of the nation. And you have musicians who kind of identify with that philosophy. Oh, Louis Armstrong. I mean, yeah, he was great back in his day. It's one of the ones I hear. I'm like, well, he's great now. One of my students said that to me about 15, 20 years ago. I need you to learn West End blues. Oh, man, we're modernists, man. He's great back in his day. And I said, I like to use the 7th grade math theory, which I got from a friend of mine from New Orleans named Barry Hebert. He was in the marching band, played alto. He was 2 years younger than me. And we were in the sax section. We just talked. He said, well, I'm going to be a physicist. I just like playing music. Great. So when I moved to Los Angeles to work on Jay Leno's show, I got a call from Barry Hebert. He says, man, you out here? I work for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He was working on the corrective lens for the Hubble telescope. This little kid from New Orleans who marched in the band. So I took my son out, and we met with Barry, and we went to the Wilson Observatory, and he was showing him the planets and explaining to him how gas can have density, which I still don't understand. And, the gas giants out there. And it was great. So at the end, he says, so, Reese, you ever need any help with your homework? Give me a call. He says, oh, man, you can help me with that? He says, bro, I'm a physicist. I can hang with 7th grade math. And ever since he said that, it's the 7th grade math theory is what I call to my students. I'm like, well, since you're a modernist and you're really great, then Louis Armstrong should be 7th grade math. I mean, it's almost 100 years old, or maybe it was 100 at that. No, it was almost 100 years old. Surely you should be able to do this very easily. So that is your assignment. And he refused to do the assignment.
I read about a young piano player, Sean Mason, who was one of your students and then was one of Winton's students at Juilliard and has got a good career going. And one of the things I read was that you told your students to come back having learned some Jelly Roll Morton's solos.
Yeah, it was one in specific. It was King Porter Stomp.
And he did, and almost nobody had ever
No one had ever done it.
to.
No, they just had,
So
they were so overwhelmed by it.
the question I have is, you're at university studying music from Branford Marsalis or from any heavy guy, and the assignment is learn this solo, and that almost all the other ones had never done that. What on earth were they doing in university?
I mean, you hang out with musicians, or you used to hang out with musicians a lot. When did they ever talk about stealing other people's solos? All they talk about is modernity, innovation, and playing the Jelly Roll Morton solo is really hard. That's the whole point. It's like, I'm going to give you this assignment as a freshman, and my idea is, if you stay with it, maybe by the time you're a junior, you can play it.
Mm-hmm.
And they just reject it categorically because, wow, this weather's killing me. So much of our perception of ourselves is how we feel about ourselves. And if one is normal, doing things poorly makes one feel bad. But because I'm abnormal, doing things poorly makes me excited.
Yeah.
My students were just regular, normal people, and Sean is a very abnormal kid. And I'm always looking for the abnormal ones.
Yeah.
Because you practice this thing for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, for 4 weeks. I'll give you, this is a better example. There was a student, a saxophone player, and I was getting him to listen to Lester Young. And he just couldn't cop it. And I said, man, that's really sad, bro. I mean, Lester Young never played anything faster than an eighth note, and you can't play that. And you can play all these 16th notes, you can't play eighth notes. And I'm teasing him. So we are at a convention. It's called the Jazz Educators Network, the Gen Conference. And I'm talking to students, and I said, yeah, you got to listen to early music. And he heard me talking about it, and he was very angry at me because he was so bad at this.
Huh.
And he just interjects, well, that's not for everybody. And I just turned around quickly and saw it was him. I said, man, how the blank would you know? I said, you've been playing music wrong for about 10 years, and you think you're going to get it right in 6 weeks? And I just asked him, I said, how long does it take a baby to walk? He says, I don't have kids. I said, do you know kids? I mean, okay, since you clearly can't answer the question, I'll help you. It is anywhere from 8 months to a year and a half, depending on the kid. Some kids even take longer. I said, if you ever watch children, they stand up and they try to walk, they take one step, they're happy, then they fall, then they cry, because they want to walk. But the brain doesn't work that way. It's writing the code, and you have to be patient. You've asked your brain to do something you've never done. It's writing the code, and instead of being patient, if you were a baby, you would just sit on the floor and say, I intend to be carried for the rest of my life because this is too difficult. And when I said it that way, he backed off. And he called me 2 years later and said, it took a while, but man, this has changed the way I think about music. I'm like, great. And I hang up the phone and go to work.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of thing. When you tell a student, learn King Porter Stomp. Man, at first, it's incomprehensible that it could be that modern and that old. It's just incomprehensible. And then modern piano players have great right hands and crappy left hands, because they all want to learn how to play solos like saxophone players. Back then, they had great left hands and great right hands.
Yeah.
So now you have to teach your left hand how to do things after having a lazy left hand for God knows how long. So there's a million reasons. I mean, this is the short version. I could get into, and Sean came back in a month and was like, yeah. I said, wow, okay. So then I gave him 2 pieces by Edvard Grieg. I said, learn these. He came back in a month, he played the pieces. I said, yeah, you don't belong here. You need to get out of here. He says, where should I go? I said, you should go to Juilliard. You'll be in New York. He says, well, how do I do that? I said, you go to juilliard.edu, and if you can't figure out the rest of it, then maybe I'm wrong about you. And I called Wynton. I said, there's a guy coming your way. You need to look out for him. He says, yeah, all right, I got you. 3 months later, Wynton calls me, hey, man, have you ever heard of this kid from Charlotte? I said, that's the guy I told you about 3 months ago. He says, oh, he's in. I said, oh, I know he's in. It's just certain people have that thing.
That echoes something that happened to you when you were about that age. Was Alvin Batiste told you had to get out of Southern University?
Very different circumstance.
Oh, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me. So Alvin Batiste is a great clarinet player.
Yes, he was.
Died only a few years ago.
Yeah, he was a great clarinetist and a smart man, but very rigid in his thinking. And he was one of those people who believed that, music is a serious business, so you have to be serious at all times. And I was not serious. I mean, I was serious about music, but I wasn't serious about the diligent practice of the saxophone, because I played in a rhythm and blues band as a kid, and music was fun to me. And all music is fun, even the hard stuff, even this stuff. I mean, it was terrorizing me, but I'm like, this is great. I have a chance to mess up in front of all of these people. So he saw me playing the Grover Washington song, Mr. Magic, for 3 girls in the music building.
Huh.
And at that time, he immediately deemed that I was not serious, because I should be playing giant steps for them. I mean, the idea that I was trying to win over, girls with giant steps is absurd, but that's kind of where his space was. So he called my dad, who also shared that space with him, and said, your son is over here bullshitting, he's not serious. And then that was it. My dad said, Bat says you can't go to Southern anymore. I said, I'm going anyway. He says, you can go, but I'm not paying for it, which meant that I wasn't going. So then I went to the Berklee School of Music instead, because of course they're more serious. Not really, but that's the 1,000-mile away view, the satellite view. Oh, Berklee School of Music, they're serious there. So that's why I was not told that I shouldn't go there because they were overwhelmed by my prowess. They just had a very different interpretation on what it takes to be a musician.
All this talk about practicing and development is a little triggering for me. You may have noticed the guitar in the corner. I've got a lesson, and I only started picking up a guitar like a month ago.
Excellent.
My wife and I went down to Nashville. Everyone in Nashville had a guitar, and I didn't know how to do anything with those things. People who didn't seem to know a lot about music
Right.
could pick up a guitar, right? So, okay. I cannot believe how sad I sound. I cannot believe how hard it is to play a major scale.
It is.
And anyway, this is neither here nor there, but I'm wondering, I just got to sweat it out. I got up early this morning to play my scales. And
it's really simple to explain. I played golf one time with a neurosurgeon, and I said, well, I'm going to enjoy this a lot more than you would because I'm interested in what you do. And we talked about the brain for 4.5 hours, and I learned, clearly I'm not going to be a damn neurosurgeon, but the things I learned very simply were that, the brain controls every aspect of our lives. Like, eyes don't actually see, ears don't actually hear. The brain controls every aspect. And every time you come up with a new thing, this is the part that applies to you. Every time you come up with a new idea or a new thing, then the brain has to write a code for it. And the brain does not write quickly. The brain writes at roughly 0.001 millimeters every 24 hours. So it is a very slow and diligent process. It might be faster for some people, but the average, the aggregate is 0.001. So if you're thinking about how slow that is when you develop a new task, and then you add age to it, and all of the memories and all of the tasks that we've asked the brain to do over the last 5 or 6 decades, the brain's pretty pissed off at you right now. And it's going to do it. It's just going to take some time.
Man. And more time than when I was a kid.
Absolutely. There's more crap in your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It's much easier when there's nothing in there.
Yeah.
But there's all this data, and it has to fight, because it's like he said, imagine that the brain is a computer without an eraser. So it doesn't, after a while, there's no space to cut. It just writes over other data, which is why when you see athletes that suddenly they say they started choking, it's like you learn a way to do it. It's probably the wrong way. And then people correct you over the years, but in certain pressure situations, the wrong way just, like the frontal lobe is the learning lobe, and the rear lobe is the doing lobe. And some of this information suddenly rushes to the front lobe again, and it just scrambles the whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what choking is. And you just have to work to write over it enough. It's just like an everyday kind of occurrence. I have little things that I do that only classical music would expose. I mean, certain notes, I lift my fingers off of the instrument when I shouldn't. But when when the notes are flying by, it's imperceptible. But suddenly I'm playing these lines and I realize that it's not making sound, and I have to play it over and over again, and then I realize certain fingers are lifting, and I work to correct that. But in certain pressure situations, everything, it goes back to what it knows.
When you come off the road, you are going home to New Orleans.
Yeah.
Where you didn't live for a long time.
Right.
Where you grew up.
Right.
You're finishing a year as the artistic director of the Ellis Marsalis Center for Music in New Orleans. What made you take that gig and go back home?
Well, I was actually determined to go home. And got to that point in my life, circumstances, emotional circumstances, and I looked around and said, man, I always wanted to go back anyway. So once I went back, the executive director said, hey, why don't you do this since you're coming back? Of course, when PR gets a hold of it, then it becomes going home to like continue his father's legacy. It's a great fundraiser. It's great to say that, but I was moving back regardless. It was just time to get back. That's where I wanted to be anyway. So, I mean, it was a tough move for a million reasons. It was that first, like last year, I don't remember much of last year. It was just such, that was a tough move. It was a lot of emotion behind that move. And but this year, everything's starting to regulate itself.
Okay. Has New Orleans changed? I mean, it went through a lot. With Katrina, but
I think Katrina was the big flashpoint. Katrina was the moment when there was suddenly an influx of people from other places that just showed up. So that was the first shock for me. So I was 45, 2005, 45. And then I went back to New Orleans, and I'm used to hearing New Orleans talk. Where you at, bro? What's happening? Hey, partner, what can I do you for? And I walked into a store, and the guy said, what's up, man? Like clearly a New York or over there thing. And it stunned me. Like, oh my God, they're here. And then the more I realized, they're there. So they have changed the city in some good ways. I mean, the tolerance for corruption is not near, the threshold is much lower than it used to be, which added to the dysfunction of the city. And, but it's still pretty much, divided along racial lines and racial perceptions. I mean, the Old South doesn't really die. It might hibernate for a little while. But that doesn't bother me, because what I always do is I can always find people who don't represent that. Like not everybody in New Orleans represented that even back in the old days. So, I mean, my life is full of people who I think are just, cool and forward thinking. And the backwards people, well, they're not going anywhere. They'll be there, And, but there's an energy there that I've never felt any. It's the most unique city in the United States. And, ironically, it would be a tie between, Montreal and New Orleans. And they're both former French colonies. So I think that those are very, very unique places.
It's one of the few places where a musician, a horn player, can work a lot. Although sometimes the standards aren't sky high.
Well, it depends on which standards you're talking about. The standards that care to people are sky high.
Yeah.
It makes people feel good. The musicians have this kind of outward charismatic approach. There's really not a market for introverted geniuses who can't communicate with people and play all this esoteric crap that nobody can understand. I mean, well, in New York, there's a market for it. There's a couple of clubs where musicians go, and it's only musicians in the audience and only musicians on stage. But if your goal is to play for people for decades and decades. It's hard to do that when your music, when it's hard to do that when people have to know what you're doing to like what you're doing. So in New Orleans, you don't have to know anything. Half of the time, the musicians don't know all of that stuff, but they know how to create a sound that brings joy to people, and that's why they're there. They're not there for a music education.
So there was this interesting night at Jazz at Lincoln Center. They had this battle of the big bands. They had the New Orleans Jazz Orchestra, and they had Captain Black Big Band.
Mm-hmm.
Orrin Evans from Philadelphia.
Yeah, I know.
Playing sort of, I mean, kind of a post-Coltrane, very modern stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And New Orleans Jazz Orchestra, at the end of the night, they did a second line march around the hall. Mm-hmm. And I like the Captain Black Big Band because they were musicians I've heard of playing the stuff that I've been listening to all my life.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody who was with me preferred New Orleans Jazz Orchestra.
Of course.
Yeah.
You know, you're a strange one too, just like me. You know, strange people have to understand that they're strange.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem I have with this kind of like, you know, it's not really faux because they believe it. This intellectual outrage that we tend to have, talking about, man, back in the day, man, we would be perceived differently. I'm like, it was always been the same. There's just not that many people who are interested in that. If it's kind of the delivery mechanism. If the delivery mechanism is we're geniuses and we're scholarships and you need to step up to us, people will reject that. But with my group, I mean, it's just like we're just like four jackasses on a stage and we play complicated music, but it doesn't feel complicated because we like it. We just like people, we like each other, and we're not trying to prove a point.
Hey, you're running a school.
I'm not running the school.
You're the figurehead of a school?
I'm not even the figurehead of that school.
What is your relationship with the school that calls you?
And it's not really a school.
It's a community.
It's a community center. In the United States, we have these centers, Boys Club and AAU, and a lot of these kids who they consider at risk because they have single parents who work a lot, or both parents work a lot, and kids are home a lot between the hours of like 3 p.m. and 6 p.m.
Yeah.
To keep them from sitting on the porch and allowing trouble to come to them, you put them in a football camp or a basketball camp or a baseball camp. And there's nothing like that for people who don't have physical gifts.
Yeah.
There's like extra work at math class or something like that, but there's a whole bunch of people in the middle, and the idea was let's give them an instrument, let's give them some music lessons, not to turn them into musicians. It's not a music school, because while they're there, from 3 to 4, it's homework. So they do their homework in a controlled environment where all of the snacks are healthy. I mean, painfully healthy. I hate being over there. All of the snacks are healthy, and the kids are in an environment where it's safe and people are nurturing and looking after them. And then they take music classes, and then we release them to their parents. So we're not starting, it's not a music school. Musicians are always going to find their way. Musicians found their way even before music schools were invented. They'll always find their way. So what we're trying to do is use all of the positive characteristics of music, which if I had to try to define it, which I think is so much, well, all of music is invisible for the most part, other than the instruments themselves. So learning how to play odd meter, learning how to play in tune, learning how to play in time, learning how to play with others, these are all spatial realities. And in science and math, as you become more extreme in the upper echelons of it, it's all spatial understanding. So if you can't really teach quantum physics to a 7-year-old, but you can teach them a scale. And if you can teach them how to hear and play in tune, then you've already activated the construct for spatial learning that should they wind up becoming like Barry Hebert, they're already well into it in a way that other kids would not be because they didn't play instruments.
We've got a program here in town that's kind of similar for free lessons, free instrument loans to kids who couldn't afford it. It's called Orchestra, and I've been involved with them for like 7 or 8 years. And I used to butt heads with the artistic director who absolutely does run that program. I used to say, well, There's not a lot of opportunity for the best kids to become the best, for the best musicians to become the best musicians. As you said, we're not trying to make excellent musicians. We're trying to make excellent citizens.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. I agree. I totally agree.
Yeah.
You got to find things for these kids to do rather than sit around and, what we used to say in the old days, watch TV. But no, they sit around and they look at their phones all day.
Yeah.
They're either playing video games or they're scrolling on the internet or doing TikTok videos. And we have to try to engage them in a different way. You know, and some people you're not going to reach, but you got to try to reach the people you can reach.
When you go out on the stage on Wednesday night, are you going to be nervous? Does that still happen?
I don't know. I suspect not.
Yeah.
But the last time I played with an orchestra, it was in Poznan, Poland, and I said, "Oh, this is fine," and I walked on stage, and it never stopped. It just shook the whole time. I'm like, "What the hell is that?" Just, you don't know. It's part of the beauty of it. You don't know. I suspect I'll be fine, and if I'm nervous, it'll be in the very, very, very beginning of it. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'll be there if that calms you down or makes you nervous.
That'll make me feel better.
Okay.
We've been at this for a long time, my man.
Okay. It's really good catching up.
Always, brother.
Talk to you soon.
Yep.